Hello there, welcome to the Saroy channel, wherever you are in the world, and I do hope you're doing exceedingly well, and so much love to each and every one of you. I do hope you're doing remarkably well, and that you're full of health and well-being and vitality, and that you're keeping yourself lovely and warm. Don't forget the lovely hot cup of cocoa. Fill it up with lots of marshmallows, or if you fancy coffee or tea, because I have a fabulous story for you tonight. But before we get started, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, click the notification bell and the thumbs up. And let's get started with tonight's story. Dear Sarah and all your lovely listeners, my name is Heather. Well, it's not rarely, of course, but that's what I'll call myself for the purposes of this story, as I need to keep personal details, such as my name and specific locations, as obscure and inconspicuous as possible, if you don't mind. That is to ensure that I don't end up getting fired from my job, or worse still, being labelled and vilified for being completely off my head or categorised as completely bonkers, especially after I share my extraordinary Bigfoot encounters with you. I very much doubt that the people at my workplace would ever believe in this incredulous, seemingly fictitious creature that we call Bigfoot, for it would seem that many epitomise such an outlandish critter to be the stuff of fables, legends and myths. But those of us who have encountered this idiosyncratic, anomalous creature, we know that he's real. I presently live in California, which is on the west coast of the United States, and I live in an apartment in downtown Los Angeles. But I grew up in an area in the northernmost coastal part of California, on the Oregon border, about a 6-hour drive from North San Francisco, in close proximity to the Redwood National Park in Humboldt County and Del Norte County, which is home to the tallest, most magnificent trees in the world, and many resplendent areas of national forest. My strange, rather curious story that ultimately led to my Bigfoot encounter begins when I was working for a glossy magazine in Los Angeles. I ended up being summoned into my boss's office, and I could tell by the somewhat irked, vanquished expression on her angular, fair-skinned face that she was far from pleased with me. My boss at the time was a tall, platinum, thin blonde woman in her early 50s, who had as many plastic surgeries as you and I have eaten hot dinners. For if you can improve on nature with the surgeon's instrument, then why not? And she would be first in line to go under the knife, so to speak. I think she lived on copious amounts of coffee for sustenance and energy, for indeed I had never seen her eat a single day in the 12 years of working for that magazine. I know she's petrified of carbohydrates and used to run away from them in terror like you and I would flee from a predator. For her, the very idea of putting on a single ounce of weight was so soul-destroying and distressing. It's pretty much like that among all the people where I work, who are so focused on their physical appearance that they never consider for a moment that they're so much more than just their physical bodies. I wish with all my heart they would realise this about themselves. I will say this about my colleagues at work, and that they're among the saddest, most disconnected people I've ever met, as the superficial world they inhabit in their own heads has literally robbed them of any real meaningful joy. They will go to extreme lengths to delay the aging process as much as they possibly can. It would seem that age for them is a very ugly, repugnant, repellent and hideously foul word that should be hastily brushed under the carpet, as any discussion on the matter invariably brings out the proverbial hornet's nest of dread, so to speak. Anyway, back to my boss, whom I will call Irma. "I'm not pleased with you, Heather," she said, eyeing me through her glamorous bright purple vintage glasses, with a distinct look of displeasure on her face. "Sorry," I explained. "What exactly is the problem? Don't you like the article I wrote about our client's long struggle with substance abuse?" "I have no problem with the article that you've written. In fact, I would say it's exemplary and impeccable, and of the highest standard. But I do have a big problem with these." She began tossing all the photographs at me, rather like she was shooting a confetti gun, where they landed haphazardly on the table and the floor. These poignant photographs were actually taken on a photo shoot of a well-known celebrity that I'd interviewed for the purposes of the magazine. "What's wrong with the pictures?" I said, picking a few of them off the floor to examine them closely. "This is what I think of them," said Irma, using her long pink talons to shred the pictures into pieces so that they looked like they'd been through a shredding machine. "I don't understand," I said, looking rather perturbed. These pictures are they're amazing. They're real and authentic. Our readers can really relate to the challenges that the celebrity has faced during her life. I think they can identify with her. Look at the sad look in her eyes, rimmed by these dark shadows, and look at the lines on her face and the crepey pale skin. Don't you think they paint a vivid picture of how tough things have been for her of late? Heather, snapped Irma, we are a glossy magazine, for goodness sake. Our readers don't want to see dark circles and lines under the eyes. Our readers want to see a flawless, smooth complexion. They want to see a perfect smile, a beautiful countenance. Is that so hard for you to understand? I don't think that's entirely true, I said. I don't think people are that shallow. Oh, but they are, dear. People love glamour, and that's what we give them in our magazine. It's a form of escapism. She continued, I understand you refused the makeup artist permission to glamorise our celebrity. Why on earth would you do that? What on earth were you thinking? Look how dreadful she looks in these photographs. I mean, her fair skin looks pale and pasty. Her blue eyes look as if she's been in the boxing ring with Mike Tyson. And as for the rugged texture of her deplorable skin, you could literally make purses out of it. Do you really blazonly believe people want to see pictures of celebrities looking like this? So do you want me to go back to get some more photographs of her, I suggested, looking for a quick way to redeem myself from this very sticky situation, and to somehow appease Irma, who looked so angry. That will not be necessary, dear, but just so you know, I will never ever publish photographs like this. Do you understand? Never, never. They're quite horrific. I'll be getting them airbrushed as usual. We'll be bringing some colour back into her face and eliminating these horrendous shadows beneath her eyes. But more to the point, I still don't get what you were thinking about. Getting these photographs taken without any makeup, that's going way too far. It's nonsense, dear. Anybody would look washed out. Look, I argued, I do think it's significant to show your readers the truth. I think that'll make them relate to this woman's plight much more. Is it not just fake to pretend that she came through her emotional and physical challenges as if she stepped out of a bandbox without any war wounds to show for it? Even the redwood trees where I grew up have battle scars on their long, powerful trunks, and it makes them even more magnificent and distinguished. For goodness sake, Heather, humans aren't trees. And no one would ever thank you for showing them their battle wounds. We're a glossy magazine, for goodness sake. We use makeup and lighting effects and airbrushing as unique tools of the trade, much like an artist uses their brush to create perfection. If we showed the people the ugly, grisly truth, I don't think our readers would be buying our glossy magazines. People want to read magazines because they love seeing beautiful people. They enjoy the images of perfection. That's what sells our magazines. It's the same for all of our competitors. It's always been that way. So get used to it, dear. I don't understand why truth is so terrible, I protested. Glossy magazines, Heather, is like a great work of fiction. Our desire is to get people to buy our magazines. We make everything look attractive. That's what sells, dear. Why is that so difficult to comprehend? It's called window dressing. It's used in advertisements, food commercials, cosmetic products. It's designed to make people want to buy the hamburger or the cream that will make them 20 years younger. It's all about dreams and hopes and aspirations. I just don't agree with it, I exclaimed. It robs my article of depth. How can someone who's been through substance abuse look so flawless? It just seems so wrong. Wrong or right, Heather. That's the way we do things in the magazine business. Now, I value your incredible articles, but your interfering with the photographs and makeup artists on site is not acceptable. Do you understand this? I suppose I'm going to have to, I said. If I want to keep my job, that is. Good girl, said Irma. I knew you would see sense. I walked away from my boss's office feeling like a proud party balloon that had been popped and deflated. Why did my boss think that pictures of real people and their real lives needed to be glossed over? I had written such a gripping article that was now going to be diluted and undermined by all this fake, superficial, phony glamour. I went back to my stylish Los Angeles apartment, feeling very demoralised that evening, half tempted to call it a day and throw in the trowel with my job. But I'd worked my guts out to climb the ladder and get to this prominent position within the company. I was living in a great apartment in California, and I didn't want to jeopardise my high standard of living that I'd procured through hours of hard work. Yet I did think the way the magazine glamorised, embellished and romanticised everything was intrinsically wrong, and not healthy either. It was not wholesome for the pimply teenagers to feel intimidated by pictures of flawless, perfect skin, nor the slightly overweight youngsters to be discouraged by pictures of super skinny models that would invariably make them feel inadequate by comparing themselves with fake images of perfection. Even Cindy Crawford had been stopped in the street once and being asked, "Why do you look so perfect in the magazines, but just so normal in real life, just like the girl next door?" And she had explained that gilded, dolled-up pictures weren't even real. And she was right, of course. It was after this altercation at work that had left me feeling disenchanted and reflective about everything and what I was doing with my life. I came to the wise conclusion that getting away for a few days was definitely on the cards, so I decided to pay my parents a spontaneous, unexpected, impromptu visit. I had not seen them in ages, and I fancied surprising them with my visit. I knew my parents would be over the moon to see me again. They lived in our family home close to Redwood National Forest, where I'd grown up. I knew it would be an 11.5-hour drive, and so I ensured that I left my apartment in Los Angeles at about 3:30 the following morning, to give lots of time for the journey. I set out on the long drive, ensuring that I took a few stops as possible along my way, and I'm glad to say that the journey went very smoothly, with a few hiccups, barring 1 or 2 bad traffic accidents and a few stops for snacks. It was about 4 o'clock when I finally pulled out the long paved driveway and parked outside my parents' modern ranch-style home, where I'd grown up as a young girl. It felt so great to be home. I was amazed to see no one was there to greet me, as our 2 Bergamosa shepherd dogs, Gypsy and Trooper, were not at home, as they would have bounded exuberantly towards me to greet me and would have covered me with big wet tongues. I also discerned my father's red truck was not in the drive. It suddenly hit me with a startling clear revelation that both my parents, my younger sister and my 2 rambunctious dogs were at our whimsical beach home on the Oregon coast. How could I have forgotten? I remember in passing that they'd mentioned they'd be going there for a week's break or so. Talk about really bad timing. What a bummer, I thought. I opened the house with a spare key and deactivated our alarm system while offloading my suitcase into my childhood bedroom. Never mind, I thought. I'd spend a lovely weekend at home with or without my parents. It was still so fabulous to be back. Granted, I could drive to our beach home in the Oregon coast, but I didn't fancy that extra journey. I was considering giving my family a call on my cell, but I decided against it, as I didn't want them to feel bad that they'd missed out on seeing me. I was delighted to see that at least our cat Sugar was at home, and I noticed she had copious amounts of dried biscuits and water out to last a few days. And she looked incredibly pleased to see me and greeted me with incessant purrs, rubbing her long agile grey body against my legs. Feeling rather stiff from my long drive, I decided to get back into my car and drive to the wooded forest that I frequented a lot as a young girl. It was a charming retreat that held so many precious childhood memories for me. It was full of redwood trees, rocky outcrops and a pretty stream that cascaded through the valley. I knew that some fresh air and light exercise would do me an enormous amount of good, so armed with a water bottle and a pair of walking shoes, I got into my car and drove to the woods. As a young girl, my sister and I had called the spectacular forest that we frequented as kids Fairy Tale Grove, because that is what this place meant to us. It was full of hiking trails and the most beautiful galvanizing wooded area, easily as breathtaking and provocative as Redwood National Park itself. I began to hike up the steep, rugged and somewhat rocky open trail and discerned that there were no hikers around, but then it really was rather late in the day and would grow dark soon. But I wasn't concerned about this prospect at all, as I fully intended to make my visit very brief, but it felt so good to stretch my legs after the long drive. These graceful, elegant redwood trees are so enormous in girth and length, towering up into the blue firmament like natural, masterful, imposing vertical skyscrapers, some that can reach 30 stories high. They possess the most colossal fire and bug-resistant trunks that you have ever seen in your entire life. I've always marvelled at the distinguishing lines of green moss growing through some of the long vertical ridges, and plenty of the battle scars with the green leaves shooting out from all sides. I love nothing better than running my hands up and down the rough texture of these ancient trees, marvelling at their size and girth. As children, we had always believed that there were colonies of fairies living within these redwoods, with vast thriving fairy cities and big magical castles. For indeed these incredible specimens, with their divine nature, not to mention the reverence that they command, is nothing short of awe-inspiring. It would seem that the huge leafy canopies that shade the wooded retreat are the quintessential ecosystem for plants and animals alike. As I began walking down the long trail of this lush, temperate evergreen forest, I made my way to the steep rocky incline, where there was a pretty stream meandering through this beautiful verdant wonderland, surrounded by some rocky crags. As I walked, I could hear the sound of pretty birdsong chirping from the canopy above my head, whilst I appreciated the pretty soft shafts of sunlight that danced through the branches onto the forest floor, dappling it in a dainty, delicate, luminescent light. Suddenly, everything became deathly quiet in the forest, as if the birds ceased their joyful tweets, and for a moment everything became ominously still. Then I was certain that I was being watched. I would say that certain is an understatement, as it was indisputable that I was certainly being watched, and the feeling was incredibly discomposing. The only way that I can describe it to you is I felt exactly like a tiny mouse trapped in a tiny hole being stalked by a very sizable, determined domestic cat. I sensed something predatory was in my midst, but who or what it was, I couldn't even imagine. The worst part of it all was that I couldn't see it, but I could sense it and feel its presence, which was unambiguous and tangible, despite being so unperceivable. I could also detect a faint odour, a smell I wasn't well acquainted with. I wouldn't describe it as hideous by any manner of means, but it was unpleasant, rather like a sweaty smell. I decided that I needed to retreat from whence I'd come, but my father's words rang in my head like a resounding bell. Never, ever run from a predator. I began to walk away, speeding up my pace, but never running. I could hear the heavy feet following me. I knew I was being stalked. I turned around but saw absolutely nothing. My heart was beating violently in my chest. I was pretty sure that whatever it was that was pursuing me was seeking cover behind the gargantuan trunks of a redwood tree while trailing close behind me. Then I saw him. A head peered at me from 8 feet off the ground from behind the vast girth of a redwood tree. I knew at once what it was. It was a Bigfoot. There was not a shadow of a doubt about this in my mind. Once the critter knew he'd been spotted by me, he glided towards me on his powerful long legs. I turned around immediately and began to run away from the critter as fast as I could, no longer heeding my father's advice. I had to escape. I had to get away from this horrifying creature. I could hear his heavy breathing behind me and almost feel his pungent, acrid breath upon my back. Let me put this lightly. I knew I was dead. Then suddenly I remembered the rocky enclosure where I would hide as a little girl, and it was my only hope. I ran towards it and squeezed behind the circumscribed space, hardly daring to believe that my body still fitted after all these years. Oh, thank goodness I was so slim. I'd only once discovered it during a game of hide-and-seek. It was a large rock that had a thin, narrow crevice that was thankfully spacious enough for a slender person to hide behind, and luckily this opening was easily as long as it was wide, but it was also exceedingly narrow. As I squeezed behind this cramped, tapered opening, I wiggled my body slowly towards its furthest point. I could hear the critter pounding angrily at the rock, but even he wasn't strong enough to break it down. Then he squeezed his hefty arm through the long compression and felt along the crevices with his hands. He was trying to find me. Fortunately, his hands ended only inches away from me. Otherwise, he could possibly have yanked me out of this confined space without much trouble. The critter was incandescent with rage and began to implode by making the most horrifying blood-curdling screams that turned my blood cold and sent shivers of dread down my spine. I just remember quivering, shaking and trembling, and even though I tried to compose my body, I could not control the involuntary shudders and shakes. I don't think I've ever experienced such incredible, inexplicable fear. Even my teeth were chattering. That's how terrified I was. I now know what people feel like in life and death scenarios. I noticed that my body literally tightened as my muscles clenched, and even my legs began to feel like heavy boulders beneath me. I knew that physically the fear had incapacitated me. I could hear my rapid breathing and the fast sound of my rising heartbeat pounding through my chest. I'd vaguely seen the Bigfoot, and all I remember is beholding the shadowy 8-foot mass of long, flowing dark hair, with a cone-shaped head and swinging overlong arms, bounding after me like a monster from my most horrifying nightmares. I could hear the critter growl. He was screaming and even pounding his chest in an act of angry defiance. I knew this cantankerous, grouchy critter was as livid and as volatile as a hot, bubbling volcano ready to spew its molten lava. I assure you that every thunderous sound he made was more terrifying than the first, and he even caused the ground beneath me to wobble and vibrate like the rumblings of an angry earthquake. I began to console myself and reassure myself by taking long, shallow breaths and talking to myself. Calm down, relax, 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 I told myself. Everything is going to be fine. You are safe. You are alive. All is well. I repeated these mantras over and over again in my head to calm my alarmed state. Before long, the dark shadows of nightfall descended over the valley, and I knew I would be spending the night in this obscure hiding place. I could hear the sounds of crickets and frogs, along with owl hoots and coyotes. The worst thing of all was no one knew I was even here. I didn't even have my cell phone handy, as in those days I never carried it around with me. This was my biggest regret at this moment. I realised with horror the critter was not going anywhere. He had parked himself outside my hiding place, much like a cat mooching and prowling outside a mouse hole, in readiness to flush it out, with a determined, unrelenting resolve. I knew he was waiting for me to leave the confines of my safe, incommodious enclosure. I sensed he had a deep hatred for human beings, and was looking to extract his lethal revenge upon our species, using me as his prime example. As the night progressed, I could hear the critter snoring loudly outside my hiding place and occasionally waking up for a while, and then he would start breathing heavily and squeezing his long hands through the opening again, as he was intent on getting to me. I just stood still, closing my eyes, trying to sleep in my standing-up position, knowing that this was going to be a long, drawn-out night, and escape would be a long time in coming. It must have been very early morning, because the whole valley was bathed in the most gorgeous soft light that twinkled through the redwood trees. There were tweets of the early morning birdsong. I could see it was very early, and hear the loud, deep guttural snores of the critter, who was curled up determinedly outside my hiding spot in a deep sleep. All of a sudden I heard this low whispering sound, and a couple of acorns were being flung at me from within my tight enclosure. I looked up to see one bright eye peering in at me through the narrow opening. But this eye looked kind. It looked concerned. It looked caring. I could hear words in my head. Don't worry, I'm not going to hurt you. I've always wondered if I imagined them, but they were as real to me as if they'd been verbally articulated. The strange congenial critter was trying to encourage me to leave this space, but I was certain it was some kind of a horrifying trick. Once again I heard the words in my head, much more audibly this time. I'm not going to hurt you. Come out. I have no idea why I listened to this voice, but I did, as the critter began to beckon to me. I squeezed my way to the edge of the opening, and when I saw the female Bigfoot standing there, I was in absolutely no doubt that she wanted to help me. Her energy was so kind. She pointed to the big hairy critter on the ground, and I could see that he was in a very deep sleep. But what troubled me the most was that this upper torso of his was literally covered in rounded scars that looked like he'd been on the receiving end of a hunter's rifle and had been shot multiple times, with dozens of these round scars from bullet wounds all over his body. I know now why this critter was determined to extract his revenge on me. The female critter was very quiet, indicating for me to remain very still. She gently lowered her body to the ground and encouraged me to climb on top of her gargantuan shoulders, which I did, and she glided with me as silently as possible through the sylvan towards the parking lot where my car was parked. She obviously knew that humans access the car park with their vehicles. She stood there waiting for me to get into my vehicle, and I was amazed to discover that my car keys were still in my jacket pocket. I trembled violently as I climbed into my car and sat back on the seat. The Bigfoot kept turning towards the sylvan with an anxious, very disturbed look on her face. She was clearly worried that the male Bigfoot would wake up and come running after us, but all was very silent and undisturbed. I quickly started to rev up the engine and speed away. I could see the female Bigfoot in my rear window watch me leave as she glided back into the woods with such a seamless grace. I can still see her in my mind's eye all these years later with crystal clear clarity. I think she must have been about 7 foot tall, 600 pounds, and very lean and strong, with a powerful torso, a cone-shaped head, and very dark brown hair with an auburn hue. But it is her intelligent eyes and compassion that I shall never forget as long as I live. For indeed this beautiful Bigfoot saved my life. When I returned to Los Angeles, I never told my parents that I had dropped by for a visit because I wanted to avoid disappointing them. But my mother said, "I know it sounds strange, but when I returned from our holiday, I could swear the house felt as if you'd been around. I still work for that glossy magazine, and I'll never agree with sugarcoating all the pages with glamorous images. But we do what we have to do to make a living. It's a very competitive world out there." I think back on the female Bigfoot I encountered with so much love, for she was a beautiful critter who stepped out of her comfort zone to rescue me. And for that, I am most truly grateful. So there you are. That's my story. What an incredible story. Wow. Until next time, goodbye and good night.